to vaccinate the cows.
Cows who burp and fart methane.
Let's first ask a question: why would anybody dream of mass vaccination of cows without explaining?
So anybody opposing,
he gets very mad when you ask why.
Is simply mad and possibly stupid.
Ladies and gentlemen, this might just be the most important video that you see all year if you live in Africa.
And my position is not anti-science. My position is exactly aligned with the National Academy of Science and the Institute of Medicine.
There was a network of dozens of laboratories led by and financially supported by Pentagon, and they were carrying out military biological programs. They were experimenting with the strains of coronavirus, anthrax, cholera, African pig plague, and other deathly lethal pathogens.
According to Russia's nuclear defense forces, Washington uses the humanitarian card to get into countries where they can obtain pathogens and then use the epidemiological situation there to their advantage.
There is a clear trend. Pathogens that fall into the Pentagon's area of interest later become pandemic.
Countries like Senegal, Gambia, Nigeria, Guinea, Kenya, and many more. It's a very detailed report. Basically, Moscow is warning its African partners against such cooperation.
These are things that they've done to their own population. These are things that they've done all around the world.
He's gotten control of the World Health Organization so that they mandate vaccines all over the world, and the companies that make those vaccines are, Gates is, in many of them, the major shareholder.
You're going to want to grab every second of it from the beginning to the end. So if you would like to right now, just go grab yourselves a drink. Please do that and like and subscribe. And please share this message to those who you feel it will be useful to. When I see Vladimir Putin out in the media, the more I hear him, the more I ask myself, why am I supposed to hate this guy? As anyone who's been fearfully and wonderfully made and given gifts of knowledge, wisdom, and discernment, I find it somewhat lazy and shallow just to agree with the populist sayings without doing any personal research into what my brain has been downloading from anonymous sources. Vladimir Putin has just come out and said that Africa is the United States chemical test lab, and from my past few years of research, he's right on point. It's very valid. Listen to this.
In Ukraine, there was a network of dozens of laboratories led by and financially supported by Pentagon, and they were carrying out military biological programs. They were experimenting with the strains of coronavirus, anthrax, cholera, African pig plague, and other deathly lethal pathogens. And now they are trying to mop up the evidence of this program. But we have every reason to believe that next to Russia, in Ukraine, next to Russian borders, they were basically creating components for a biological weapon. And our numerous warns that such developments poses direct threat to the safety of Russia. They were rejected by Ukraine and by their patrons from the US. And they did it in a very brazen way.
So here's the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who has some decent intel, I suppose, saying that the United States is in Africa making chemical weapons and biological diseases. Now, we know that Bill Gates is also pushing a vaccine on livestock within the continent to players like Rudo and others who would like to partake in the experiment. Let me just say right now, I'm not a scientist and I have no experience in the medical field, so I can only speculate on these things. In my own mind's eye, I would have to be at least asking some very serious questions as to what's going on. So we researched it, and here's something that had just come out.
Natural infection reservoir and an experimental site for new biological weaponry. That is the charge emerging from the Russian Defense Ministry, which offered significant detail about what's allegedly unfolding on the continent.
I would like to remind you that the deployment of the American biological control system in Africa is carried out according to an already worked-out scenario. First, there is concern about regular outbreaks of, for example, anthrax and tularemia in one region, foot-and-mouth disease and plague in another. As a rule, this happens during meetings of U.S. ambassadors with representatives of the local Ministry of Health. American colleagues note that such outbreaks undermine the development of the region's economic potential. The level of training of senior staff and specialists in terms of neutralizing is questioned, and the need to improve their skills is expressed. Against this background, the U.S. proposes to create a center for disease diagnosis and drug testing within 1 to 2 years, which will study dangerous pathogens and the mechanisms of their mutations to develop and test modern vaccines.
According to Russia's nuclear defense forces, Washington uses the humanitarian card to get into countries where they can obtain pathogens and then use the epidemiological situation there to their advantage. And they do this in countries that they see, of course, as geopolitical opponents or where they see that their power is diminishing. And how do they do this? They do this by recommending upgrades and, for example, a 3-month training program for locals, forking out anywhere between $5 to $10 million initially, with that number potentially able to grow to $20 million. And of course, the people helping out the locals are always U.S. government agencies as well as private contractors like Big Pharma, who of course stand to benefit from any outbreak.
There is a clear trend. Pathogens that fall into the Pentagon's area of interest later become pandemic, and American pharmaceutical companies become beneficiaries. Examples are infections such as yellow fever, monkeypox, and Rift Valley fever, an outbreak of which was recorded in Cairo at the site of the U.S. Navy's military biological laboratory.
The deputy chief goes on to add that they have documents which prove that the U.S. military biological presence on the African continent is growing significantly. And we're talking about countries like Senegal, Gambia, Nigeria, Guinea, Kenya, and many more. It's a very detailed report with facts provided to back up each and every claim. Activities that Moscow says are aimed at forcing countries to give up their national sovereignty in the field of biosafety and make them completely dependent on the United States. And of course, this comes, as they state, on the backdrop of Russia's positioning, for example, on the African continent strengthening significantly, and also the fact that Russia and China have been working together to expose U.S. activities in Africa. And they go on to say that, of course, this is not just some wild Moscow conspiracy, as some in the West would like to think. There have been Western publications talking about parts of these activities, something that they themselves described as a broader Pentagon initiative of biological espionage. So basically, Moscow is warning its African partners against such cooperation, saying that, of course, it leads to no good.
Who says Washington's experiments with dangerous biological and chemical substances stretch beyond the African continent.
So these are things that they've been doing before. These are things that they've done to their own population. These are things that they've done all around the world. Vietnam, Japan, Africa is just their playing ground. But look at those countries where they are situated. It's all strategic countries where they have an interest in them.
Now, could this be true, or is it just propaganda? Of course, Russia wants to paint the United States as the bad guy. That's how the game is played. You can't just listen to the Russians and say, yes, that's 100% fact, and I'm going to go with that story. No, I need to hear from the American side as well. So let's not just ask anybody, but let's ask the man who is leading the Department of Health for the Trump administration, Robert Kennedy. Here's what he had to say about this.
I know most about Gates, because I've written a book about him, and that what he calls philanthrocapitalism, which is you use philanthropy to make yourself rich, and you use it strategically, and that's what he's done again and again. He's gotten control of the World Health Organization so that they mandate vaccines all over the world, and the companies that make those vaccines are Gates is, in many of them, the major shareholder. And he did the same thing with the Green Revolution. He got a hold of the regulatory agencies in African countries and forced them to to change the nature of agriculture. There's 20,000 generations of agriculture of people growing crops like sorghum and plantains and yucca and all these plants for subsistence. And he said, no, we're going to transfer them all to these, GMO monocultures of corn, and then we're going to bring in companies that he owns, Kraft, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, these big food companies, processing companies, to buy that, and that's going to be the deal. And then, of course, during COVID, all of that shut down, and you had, there's 30 million Africans now as a direct result of Gates' policy who are now on the edge of starvation.
Tell that story that you shared with me a couple of years ago about the vaccines that Gates sent over supposedly for women that, I don't know, was to control birth control or what?
RFK came here with receipts, and it's backing up some very serious and substantial allegations as to the motivations of Gates.
And it really made me wonder about what his motivations are.
Being in the money and the depopulation, which he talks about sometimes. And before I forget, please, everybody, if you would please like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Now, you might think that Robert Kennedy is an anti-vaxxer, anti-science conspiracy theorist, but he's not. I'll let him tell you in his own words, as he also explains how these vaccinations are done with full immunity. And if anyone gets injured by taking them, they have no recourse. You can't sue or get help with your conditions that you could end up with. Check it out.
Subject of vaccines, and since it seems to be a great interest of yours, I challenge you to debate me on it. And I'm going to tell you just what my position is. And my position is not anti-science. My position is exactly aligned with the National Academy of Science and the Institute of Medicine. People don't know my position because people call me an anti-vaxxer, but I'm not. I'm pro-vaccine. I had all my children vaccinated. I believe the vaccine should be tested, safety tested. People don't know. You cannot sue a company that makes vaccines that injures you, no matter how egregious the injury is, no matter how negligent that company was, no matter how toxic the ingredient. Furthermore, they're completely insulated, so there's no incentive for them to make vaccines safe. Furthermore, they're also exempt. They're the only medicine that's exempt from safety testing. So now, one of the 72 vaccines currently given to our children, mandated, has ever been tested against a placebo. That means nobody knows what the risk profile is, and nobody can say with a scientific certainty if that vaccine is averting more problems than it causes. And I don't think that we ought to be mandating medical interventions for unwilling Americans unless we know precisely that vaccine is going to end up helping people rather than hurting them. The Institute of Medicine is the ultimate arbiter of vaccine science, according to Congress and HHS. And the Institute of Medicine has time and again in 1991, 1994, 2011, 2014 has scolded and rebuked and screamed at the CDC for not doing safety testing on any of these vaccines. And we've seen the vaccine schedule. I had 3 vaccines when I was a kid. My children got 72. It changed in 89, and if you were born prior to 89, your chance of having a chronic disease, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, autism, food allergies, is 12%. If you were born after 89, it is 54%, according to HHS. And nobody's explaining where is it all coming from? Where's all the autism coming from if it's not vaccines? Why is it in my generation, 1 in 2,500 kids had autism, and in this generation, 1 in 34? CDC is supposed to tell us where the diseases are coming from. Why is it in my generation, 1 in 400 kids had food allergies, peanut allergies, and 1 in 10 today.
So he's following the scientific studies with keen profundity, with probing and inclusive information from the laboratories and leading medical institutions around the world. And he's saying Africa has a problem, as well as the world's health issues, which have arisen over the past 30 years. And those statistics can't be ignored. And when there are so many questions that need to be asked about what's being spread by these vaccines, and the ones who are spreading it don't want you asking questions, that's when you know you have a problem. Like, take William Ruto in Kenya, for example, saying that people in Kenya are just maybe downright stupid for not wanting to do this.
So anybody opposing vaccination to eliminate FMD and PPR is simply mad and unreasonable and possibly stupid. I mean, honestly, how else can you explain?
And as he said that, I have a clip right here where I think this lady here hit the nail on the head when she said this.
That vaccine, why, let's first ask a question, why would anybody dream of mass vaccination of cows without explaining? I think in his mind, William Ruto sees himself as an emperor. So all he needs is a decree. So he comes up with a decree, and your cows will all be vaccinated. He gets very mad when you ask why. Because people need an explanation.
So I hope this information made its way to you on time. And I also want to say our prayers are with you. Peace on earth and goodwill towards all men and women in Africa and around the world. And I want to thank you all for watching. I ask that you please like, subscribe, and click that notification button so when we get information out, you can get information in. Blessings to you all, and have an awesome day. Bye-bye.